Dating after divorce. It can be absolutely unhinged in the best way possible, and I can't wait to talk about it. Here is the best way I can describe it. Dating after divorce is like being handed back your driver's license after years of not being allowed to drive. And getting my driver's license at 16 was the absolute most freeing day of my life, similar to the day I started dating after I got divorced. It's so exciting. And also, you might have forgotten some things or never even learned those things to begin with if you've been with your partner for a really long time. So, there's also some new rules. Also, you're probably doing it on an app which may not have even existed the last time you were single, which is its own entire experience. This episode is going to be fun, but it's also going to have actual useful information in it, including things people don't always want to say out loud. I'm going to say them because, my friends, that's what I do in life. Say what no one else will. Welcome back to Breaking Upward. I'm Rachel Newhouse, and this is my co-host, Alice. If you hear puppy snores in the middle, it's because I'm holding Alice. Before we get into today's episode, as usual, nothing in this podcast is legal, financial, or therapeutic advice. I'm speaking from my own experience and research, not guidance for your specific situation. Please work with a licensed professional who knows your case. All right, let's get into it. People always want to know, am I ready to date? And the honest answer is probably not. And that's okay. You're never really ready for anything that you start. And the only way to really figure out what you want from a relationship as the person you are today and now is to start finding out. So, a better and different question is, what do I want from dating right now? Not forever, but today. And not forever, that's really hard to think about when you're moving from a marriage. But remember, that obviously wasn't forever either, or you wouldn't be listening to me right now. So we don't have to be so serious about dating. Maybe you want company. Maybe you want someone to have dinner with who is not a kid or not a coworker. That's real. That's legitimate, right? Maybe you want to remember what it feels like to be attracted to someone and have someone attracted to you. Maybe you want to eventually build something serious. All of that's great. And that's also not something that requires you to have it figured out on the first date. You don't have to marry someone. You're on a date with them. Going on a date is not a long-term commitment. Knowing what you're looking for right now, not for 10 years from now, makes the whole thing significantly less overwhelming. You don't have to be deciding your entire romantic future. You just have to decide if you want to have dinner or a drink with this specific person this Thursday. That's it. Before we talk about all the fun of dating, I need to put my sexual assault nurse and nurse midwife hat on for a minute. I really can't resist it. I want to talk to you about some safety basics that are really important when you're dating for the first time in a long time. First, make sure that you're meeting in public for the first several times and tell a friend where you're going and who you're meeting. And have an escape text system, a friend who is on standby, who's going to text you at a predetermined time, or who you can text them with emergency or, some code phrase if you need an out. I had an escape text system for every first date I had, and I told every single date that I had a babysitter, even when my son was with his dad. That was a gift I gave myself because my kid is sick or whatever is a really, really good way, an easy way to get out of a date. I only used it one time, but knowing it was there every time meant that I went on dates I probably wouldn't have otherwise, and several of them were genuinely and surprisingly good. The one time I used my emergency escape, it wasn't actually an emergency situation. I was just super annoyed with this guy. And I texted my friend our code word, and she called and was like, "Hey, he's sick. He's throwing up." I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I have to go." I left a 20 at the bar, hightailed it to the elevator. I called my friend while I was waiting for the elevator, and I was saying something like, "Oh, if I have to listen about one more speakeasy, I'm going to die." And the elevator door opened. And the mirror that you see sometimes in the back of an elevator, in the mirror, I could see that he was standing right behind me when I said that. It was probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. And he made it worse because he got in the elevator with me, and we were on a rooftop in Chicago, so I had to ride all the way down from the rooftop with him and me in the elevator together. I did actually have an emergency one time when my son got hurt, when I wasn't there, and I told my date that, and maybe my date knew that I did this or something. Maybe he had, like, ESP. He was like he's like, "So you're gonna leave the date just because your kid's sick?" And I was like, "Seriously? Screw you, dude. Yeah, if my kid's sick, I'm leaving." But anyways, regardless, those are my silly stories. But if you actually get a weird feeling, you have no obligation to stay on a date. Trust your gut immediately. Not like, "Oh, well, I have to be nice and stay to the end of the drink." No, you don't. If you get a weird feeling, you get the heebie-jeebies from a dude, you can leave right there and right then. You don't have to go on a second date or a third date or stay till the end of this one or meet him for 6 months. I mean, the things people do to not make people feel bad, if you don't like how you feel and you feel especially a safety concern or you're like, "Something's really off," let yourself out of it and let yourself off the hook immediately. I had a friend who said a guy was decent, but he gave her the heebie-jeebies, and she casually dated him anyways. She never really liked him. She always got a creeped out feeling. She found out that he was a convicted rapist later. Also, girls, Google these guys before you ever meet them in private and in person, not because you need to Google stalk them and learn everything about them, but you should know if someone's a killer and been convicted of that or a rapist and been convicted of that. I think that's baseline information we should know. And, the internet's really good about telling us those things now. It has absolutely gutted me when I've been a sexual assault nurse and been working on cases. People call them rape kits, but we call them evidence collection kits in the hospital. When I have had to take care of girls and women who went home with guys and they got assaulted by them and the person actually had a history of that. That guts me because I don't want anyone in that position. This is not to say it's anyone's fault that this happens, right? It's never someone's fault if they get assaulted. You can't predict what someone is going to do. There's no shame in that, okay? But I also wish there had been better protections in place for her. It is never your fault if someone assaults you in any way. And it's also important to remember at that same time, we do live in a world where we know men rape women more than the reverse. So being as safe as we can is important. And at the same time, we can't control everything. So it's hard for me to even say that. I get so nervous trying to tell people about safety systems and things like that because I don't ever want someone to think that I'm saying that they bear the weight of someone else's choice to violate them. That's not true at all. I just want everyone to take precautions that make them feel safe. And I want everyone to be as safe as possible. Okay? Light stuff, huh? All right. Well, I'll take my nurse brain out for a minute and we'll get to some lighter stuff. I promise. So first dates after a divorce, that can be a very specific experience. It can feel super awkward or it can feel super fun. It can feel all of the things. When you're on a first date as a person who's been married, who has a kid, who has a whole complicated story, and you're trying to figure out how much of that story to tell to someone you've known for like 10, 15, 40 minutes, the answer is you don't need to tell someone all of it yet. You can tell them some of it because you're not a blank slate and pretending to be is exhausting and sort of dishonest. But you're a person with a life and you can just own that. You don't have to be embarrassed of your history, but you also don't have to, verbal diarrhea the whole thing out for them either in the first date, unless that's your style and their style. You do you. Like I alluded to before, I went on a date with a man who talked about speakeasies for 45 minutes. This was the emergency date call. He went on and on about speakeasies. He was completely obsessed with them. He didn't ask me one question about myself, not one. I also went on a date with a guy who was perfectly lovely, but had the absolute worst breath I have ever smelled in my life. And we never even got anywhere close to kissing. Even the bartender at the bar could smell his breath. And when we went to the bathroom, him and I both looked at each other and just plugged our noses and we were like, oh my God. He was clean otherwise, but halitosis, right? Medical term for bad breath. I also one of my favorite dating stories of all time is when I met, and went on a date with an Egyptologist. So that's someone who's like an expert in the history and stuff of Egypt. So he used to do Egypt tours. He was Egyptian. And, there were some things absolutely fascinating about it, but the dude gave me a test on hieroglyphs at the date, lied about his height. It was like a whole thing. And then, like, wanted to kiss me and wanted to go back to his place. It was super strange and awkward, but it's also one of my favorite stories to tell of all time. I told it in my TikTok stories one day. So if you want the full version, you've got it there. I also met a man in an elevator on the way to a first date one time, and that guy was significantly more interesting than the person I actually ended up meeting and ended up going out with him again. Another time, I met two guys who were friends at a sports bar. There was a sports championship I wanted to see. I am a total bandwagon girl, so, like, don't think I'm a sports fanatic, but, like, when there's a championship or something and it's local, I'm excited about it. So I went to the sports bar down the street from my condo, and there were no seats there, but there was, like, these guys had bought a table and bought bottle service, and two of them were like, "Oh, come over here, you can sit with us." And I was like, "Great." I got free drinks and hung out with them all night. Went out with two of the guys at the table later, separately, not together, but separately, had a good time, and, it was just fun. You can just treat these things as fun. I've been on dates with baristas, CEOs, surgeons, lawyers, medical cannabis startup founders, psychiatrists, students, and even a 21-year-old when I was 31. One thing I think I did really well dating was I used it as a tool to figure out what I wanted, what I needed, what I would tolerate, and what mattered to me. I, no joke, went on about 200 dates in 2 years, sometimes multiple dates a day because I have my son most of the time. So I didn't have tons of days to do this, but sometimes I would see two or three guys even in a day just for a coffee or a drink, not like full on, dinner dates or something. Um, Chicago made that especially easy, especially the age and the stage that I was at. But one thing that I did differently is my friends all had these lists of criteria. They have to be 6 feet tall, even though I'm only 5'2". They have to have a certain kind of hair or ethnicity or education. I really couldn't believe their restrictions. I vowed to myself that a long and superficial checklist was going to do nothing but tell me that I was going to be unhappy with this person and really not give me many choices or options. So I had a very short checklist. Even as a 5'9" girly, they had to have a job and be able to pay their bills, and they had to be able to make me smile pretty quickly. For a first date, that was enough for me. Of course, as you get more serious, you need to expand that list and you have to have standards, of course. I have very high standards, sometimes too high of standards. But I know people can get super hung up on things like height, but I think it's one of the silliest things to screen people out with. I may be different than other women, but at 5'9", I had no problem going out with a surgeon who was 5'2", who had a growth disorder. But I also find Peter Dinklage incredibly sexy. This isn't like I have a thing for people who are shorter than me, but I truly am unbothered by that. If a guy is unbothered, I'm unbothered. So if you get hung up on height or money or education or cars, instead of how someone makes you feel, you're probably going to limit yourself and your options pretty significantly. I would love to see more people go on first dates with people that aren't physically their type, but who they think seem cool. Sometimes the in-person vibes are very different than the online ones, and you might be more attracted to someone in person than your predetermined criteria allow for. Dating after divorce can be genuinely unhinged, as mine was, but it's also really fun and interesting, and you're going to collect stories, and I want to hear all of them. So we're going to go back to a topic that's important, but that you may not want to talk about. And I think I may have addressed this somewhat before. I know I did on my TikTok. I'm not sure if I did in a podcast, but we're going to talk about sexual health because I have worked in the sexual and reproductive health world for about 15 years. And also because almost nobody talks about this, and they really should. If you're entering the dating world after a long marriage or relationship, you're going to need to have a conversation about sexual health before you become physically intimate with someone. That includes you getting yourself tested. That includes asking whether the person you're going to be intimate with has been tested, and if you're like me, asking for proof of that, especially if protection is not going to be used. This conversation can feel awkward, but it's very necessary, and it's a very efficient way to find out what kind of person you're dealing with. Someone who handles this conversation maturely is someone worth spending time with. Someone who gets defensive or dismissive is telling you something important about themselves right now before you have invested anything. I had one guy vehemently deny that he had ever had an STI. But then I noticed scars very consistent with HPV wart removal. I know those scars because I had done those wart removals on patients and the post wart removal evaluation in office. So I knew what I was looking at. And I say this to say that people can and will lie if they're embarrassed. So please, please, please use protection, use condoms, no matter what someone tells you, until you see their STI screening, and a very recent one at that. You've been through a divorce. You can handle a slightly awkward conversation about testing. Promise. So, what about dating when you have kids? There is no universal rule about when to introduce someone you're dating to your kids. But there is a reasonable starting principle, not until that relationship is really stable, serious, and has demonstrated some longevity. Your child doesn't need to be a part of your dating process. Research on children's adjustment to a parent's new relationship consistently shows that children do significantly better when a parent's relationship is established before introduction rather than meeting and then getting attached to someone who may not last. In the meantime, make sure your dating life has space that is entirely yours. Not everything has to be integrated. Some things are just for you. And honestly, let me tell you this as someone who has dated and gotten married after getting divorced. Both me and my husband now, my current husband, sometimes I call him my latest husband, the latest version of spouse. We both had kids before we met. And so dating before we introduced them was really the only time we ever had truly alone together. Once you meet each other's kids and start going to their events and integrating together, you can't reverse course and really truly be alone again. It's hard enough to start a relationship when you already have kids. You know, when you're younger and dating and don't have kids, you're not dealing with parenting stuff. So give yourself breathing room to just feel young and a little free about dating until you're really ready to take that plunge and integrate your lives. Trust me, coordinating parenting with two exes and problems with your kids can be a huge libido killer. Not something you can't overcome, but it's real. So it's okay to push that down the road a little bit. So when you're dating, what are you actually doing? You're not trying to replace what you had before, right? You're figuring out what you actually want now as the version of yourself that you are today, not your married self person. What do you like in a person? Specifically, what do you like about being in a room with them? What do you like about having dinner with them? What do you like about how it goes after the date with them? What feels good? What feels off? What makes you want another date? Date like a person who knows their worth, because you do. You just forgot for a minute. Dating after divorce is not about finding the right person. It's about figuring out who you are when you're not performing wife anymore. And that is really important. And it also can be really fun. Let it be both. In our next episode, we're going to talk about starting over in your 30s and beyond, because you are not behind. You are not too late, and the blank slate, as terrifying as it is, might be exactly what you needed. If this episode landed with you, share it with someone figuring out the dating piece. I'm Rachel, and this is Breaking Upward. I'll see you next week. This is your reminder from me and Alice that Breaking Upward is not legal, financial, or therapeutic advice. Please seek out a professional for your specific situation